Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians. I'm back, Dom. I've had some time off and Sunderland still have not appointed a new head coach.
I was going to say, don't take this the wrong way, but it felt like you were off ages. And now it happened.
Yeah.
Now major. We had a few names and those names were ruled out and a few other twists and turns like that. But here we are still having the same conversation. 100 and however many days we are.
109. And I've been off for 14 of those. So I thought in part some of that was going to be a bit of a blessing and Sunderland might do it in my absence. So I was a bit like, I'm going to miss it. But here we are.
Yeah.
Again, another week.
I know, funny enough, I was only thinking that this morning randomly because I'm off the week after next. And I was thinking then, will that be it?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed it'll be next week, but we'll see.
Yeah, so obviously, before we get stuck into things, We Are Sunderland. It's still just £1 for 6 months worth of subscription. You can win a signed Sunderland shirt over on our website from last season. So that's a cracking little giveaway that we've got going on at the minute. Might as well just get straight stuck into things. Dom, obviously, the lay of the land changed, didn't it, with the Will Still sort of a announcement last week. This week, Pascal Jansen's emerged as a name that's linked. I suppose we'll start with last night's sort of developments on Dave Challinor and Stephen Robinson. Those two names aren't in contention, despite reports elsewhere. What's your sort of understanding of that?
Yeah, exactly that. Really, they're not in contention. They never have been in contention. I mean, we're not to know, but it smacks of agents. Doesn't it? Agent talk, maybe particularly on the Robinson side of things. Keen to put his name out there, maybe. It's been a while now, hasn't it? As we've just said, that someone have been looking for a new head coach. So I'm not saying either of those managers are looking for a job, but if you want to get a name out there, and someone like Dave Challinor, really, really strong, good reputation in the game. He's won 3 promotions, but he's never managed in the Championship. I don't think he's ever managed in League One up until obviously this coming season. And Stephen Robinson, well, we've been here before, haven't we? When it's going up to Scotland for coaches, and no disrespect, but it hasn't worked out. I don't think either of those names would have gone down well. Would they? Again, that's no disrespect to the manager's concern, but I just think after waiting so long, the hope is that it's going to be a bit more of an exciting name than either of those. But it won't be either of those. They're not in contention. They haven't been in contention. Pascal Jansen's the other one who's been mentioned. Now he has been in contention. Whether he still is unclear. Whether he's still a live candidate is unclear. How realistic a candidate he is at this stage is unclear. But there has been contact, and he is someone who's been on Sunderland's radar since very early in the process. I think he left AZ at the end of January. Now I know he left this season when things weren't going so well, but really good record there. Took them to the semi-final of the Conference League a couple of years ago when they were beaten by West Ham, who went on to win the competition. He was linked with Rangers at the back end, heavily linked with Rangers at the back end of last season, and spoke quite openly about that in a good interview, a good thorough interview with Sky Sports at the end of last year, back end of last year, and then he was more recently linked with Norwich this year. I just think maybe for 2 reasons really. Part of the unknown factor, and also his record. That'd be more of an exciting appointment than the 2 other names we've mentioned. But as I say, I know he's been a candidate, I know he's been a contender, but he's absolutely not the only one. There are still other contenders and candidates in the running. And on we go.
Yeah, I mean, well, just on, Dave Challinor and Stephen Robinson, I mean, it certainly felt from the outside looking at those two that, as you say, they're, gauging, social media. I know that's not the best sort of parameter or gauge, but those names didn't particularly set the world alight for supporters, and I can understand it. I think Stephen Robinson had a spell down here, didn't he, was it Morecambe, somebody similar to that, and it didn't work out. I know Morecambe have their issues off the field. But as you've said there, I think the Pascal Jansen links, they are exciting. They're certainly, again, reiterating the approach. As you say, we don't know how far along he is, if he's still in consideration, but at this stage. But they're still, it's going along with the same sort of lines that Sunderland were, is a similar sort of foreign coach to what Will Still was. They're definitely exploring that angle, you would think, more than they have done in the past. And it certainly still seems that they're going to head down that sort of direction, doesn't it?
Yeah, and Jansen at AZ has gained a real strong reputation for bringing young players through, developing young players, selling them on, and then bringing the next young players through. And again, in that interview with Sky, he talked openly about that. He talked about how he kind of relishes the challenge of not going out and spending mega bucks on a player, but nurturing a player in the knowledge that he is developing them to move on. And that has to be the model, not just at Sunderland, but at every club. Now, that doesn't mean that Sunderland are wanting to push the best players out the door. But the reality is, the financial reality has to be that while you're a championship club, that you have to be prepared to bring players in, nurture them, make a big profit on them. But what it all hangs on is, have you then got the scouting? Have you then got the recruitment model in place to have the next one in place? As we've talked about with Jack Clark, have we got the Jack Clark replacement lined up before he goes? And there's going to be countless more of those down the line, isn't there? Jansen's got a reputation for doing that. I think just finally on Robinson and Challinor, kind of don't want to labour the point really, because they aren't contenders. They've both done tremendous jobs in their own right. I mean, Challinor's won successive promotions, I think, with Stockport. Yeah. Obviously, former Hartlepool manager, won promotion there. And Robinson this year led St Mirren into Europe for the first time, I think, since 1987. So they've both done great jobs. And I'm sure they will be of interest to clubs. I might have read that Charlton had a dabble for Challinor at one stage, and other clubs have. So I wouldn't all surprise me to see those names linked with other clubs and interest in other clubs, but they're not of interest to Sunderland as things stand. And just a final one on that, when you were saying about kind of the excitement of the fans and needing a name to excite, I think that's the problem with a 109-day wait.
Yeah.
After waiting this long, the kind of feeling is, well, surely if we've waited this long, it's got to be worth our while. We've got to have the right man. And I think the problem with that is it puts like maybe candidates under undue pressure. So we've talked just as an example about Paul Heckingbottom previously, haven't we? Like, I think if Heckingbottom's appointed 3 months ago, it might not be the most exciting name, but you could make a case. He's a championship promotion winner. He's worked with young players, etc., etc. Whereas if Paul Heckingbottom's appointed now, although it's still a really sound and solid appointment, there's also, I think, the line of thinking of, we've waited 4 months for a manager who's been out of work and who's been available in that time. Again, like I haven't heard Heckingbottom's name mentioned for a long time. He might still be in contention. He might not be. I'm just pulling that one out of thin air. But I think because of the wait, there is undoubtedly more pressure now on the hierarchy.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, we spoke throughout the course of, the final few months of the season and said, I think it was after the Blackburn game, there was serious questions that are they going to have to bring somebody in now? They didn't. I think in hindsight, the club, they can look back and say, well, it was always the plan to wait until the summer, which, okay, that was Mike Dodds was, interim charge until the end of the season. So I suppose just playing devil's advocate, they'd argue that it's not 109 days. It's only effectively, the search has only really ramped up since the end of the month. I'm not sure I would necessarily buy, both sides. I do understand the need, the message of caution and taking the time and getting it right. For what it's worth, I think Sunderland, they were pretty set on getting Will Still, weren't they? So, as you say there, though, I think the 109 days things, supporters are picking up on it. They've had to wait that long. I suppose the one clear message now is that a decision has to come sooner. They can't let this drag on any longer than what it's already dragged on, can they?
Well, I don't think there's any point in clearly there's no point in setting deadlines. There's no such deadlines this stage. But like the players are due back at the end of this month. You've got to have someone in. You've got to have someone in for when the players come back, haven't you? Yeah. Because it just creates an atmosphere of uncertainty, doesn't it? If because we know, I'm sure the players know more than we do about certain things, but the players will be having the conversations we're having. The fans are having one. They're like, if they'll see names linked and names mentioned, and they'll sat on the holidays and what have you. I think that, but. So that's the obvious cut-off, you'd say. But then also, we've got a transfer window opening at the back end of next week. Now, if we'd have had this conversation 3 or 4 weeks ago, I suspect we would have said, I suspect we probably did say, you've got to have someone in by the time the window opens. Well, we've got a week. And time flies, because I can't believe it's a week since we were writing that Will Still stuff last week. But and the Still stuff has clearly set Sunderland back, because while he wasn't the only candidate, he was clearly the leading candidate. Sunderland clearly thought they had him, and then Lenz came in, and we know that changed. And I don't think there's been confirmation yet, unless I've missed it this morning. But the suggestion last night seemed to be that that's coming this weekend or early next week. We're still waiting on René Maric at Bayern. Vincent Kompany's still yet to confirm the makeup of his coaching team. But again, the strong suggestions are that Kompany's absolutely adamant he wants Maric part. They did the coaching license together. There's even suggestions that Maric had a big hand in getting Kompany to buy it in the first place. So again, as things stand here and now, still a Maric is still available, but I think that's going to officially change very soon, isn't it?
I think, as you say, I did a piece 2 days ago now, I think, when the Pascal Jansen stuff came out, and obviously touching on, the dynamic of where things are at, sort of unrest among the fan base, the 109-day wait now to where we're at. If you look at that, though, that's a risk that the club always were going to take. Now, I've spoken with, just mates, and the dynamic of where the Championship is at the minute. Like, you've got so much competition for clubs now looking for head coaches. And I think the problem is that there's no clear standout candidates at the minute, is there? Or there hasn't been up until this stage. I think, I know bookmakers' odds aren't always the best. Look, a lot of that just swings and fluctuates on where the money goes, rather than, solid information until you get right to the very end of a process. And even then that goes off, media reports, etc. But there hasn't been, consistent names throughout, has there? There's been so many fluctuations. You mentioned Heckenbottom there. He was right amongst the mix earlier on. Will Still obviously has been a prevalent name, but he'll now fade. It's a risk that they've had to take, isn't it? Or they were willing to take, but that comes with its dangers, as we've seen from the Will Still stuff last week. It's just such a strange dynamic at the minute, the Championship, isn't it?
Yeah, and like I said this a few times last week when me and Joe did. I think me and Joe did 3 vids last week, or 2 vids, and a couple of times we both kind of apologised for repeating ourselves. But I think it's impossible not to, really. And as he says, as he's about to again, because I think if as expected, Still goes to Lens in the next few days, and Maric moves up to Bayern, and and if it isn't Pascal Jansen, then who's it going to be? A name that we don't yet know of. Now that's very possible, because we were saying last week we knew that there were names in the mix. There were candidates being assessed whose identity hadn't got out yet, and then Pascal Jansen's name crept out this week. So there will be more of those. There will undoubtedly be more candidates who are probably right at the forefront of the thoughts of Kira Louis-Dreyfus and Christian Speakman, but we don't know about them yet. And if it isn't going to be Pascal Jansen, then the chances are it is going to be one of those, because if not, who's it going to be? Paul Heckingbottom, Mike Dodds again, in an interim role, which there's, that we know, well, there's no indication at all that that's going to be the case in the summer, that there is going to be an appointment. And the other thing, and again, we're repeating ourselves here, so when the appointment's made, only then will we know, I think, well, it's been worth the wait, and he's clearly been part of the thinking since early on, and now we can see why they waited. Or you can look at it and think, well, have they had to go down to plan C, D, E here, which is, which happens. Not every club goes out and gets the first choice candidate. who has been the first choice candidate, Will Still, but still wasn't available
Yeah.
until the start of May. So who was before then? These are all the unknowns, really. And I think only when an appointment is made will things become a bit clearer as to kind of how the process has taken place.
I think that's been the key underlying sort of message or from supporters or gripes, should you say, is been the uncertainty around it all. Now, I'm not under any stretch of imagination telling the club to come out and say, this is who we're after, this is what we're doing, because football doesn't work like that. But again, for me, the lack of communication, this is where the 109-day thing comes into it for me, is that's the last time you heard from your sporting director. I don't think you've heard from Kirill in terms of on a head coach search since but either then or before then. And, this after everything that went on last year with the Black Cats Barn, needing a sense of direction, this appointment, there's so much hinges on this appointment in terms of which direction are the club going in. And again, I know that social media isn't necessarily the greatest gauge of things online, but you come out and you address, you clarify. I think there's a lot of clarification needed at the moment look, the model is the word that's coined, but it's not just about that, is it? It's about, I think it was back in 2022, if I'm right, from what I read earlier this morning about the succession planning and having applicants in, thousands of head coach candidates in need, and they'll no doubt be sifting through that. But, you need to come out, I think, personally, and just explain proceedings. You can still explain what sort of analytics you're looking at without going into saying, this is who we are getting. But it gives supporters an idea of your ideology or your plan of where you want things to go. Now, again, data, that's the way that the modern game is now. We do a lot of it on We Are Sunderland, but I just think there needs to be improved channels of communication, doesn't there?
And I think when you talk about succession planning now, well, when Francesco Farioli, who's now obviously Ajax manager and one of Europe's leading young head coaches, isn't he? When he was linked in December of 2022, no, it wasn't. It was later, wasn't it? It was the back end of the season. It was the back end of the 2022-23 season. But when he was linked, we were told then it's because Sunderland are just kind of succession planning, as they would with any players. They're drawing up a database of potential head coaches down the line. Now, for all that kind of stuck in the throat a little bit at the time because things were going so well under Mowbray, and I don't think that disruption helped things. What it did do is it made you think, well, when Sunderland are in position to be looking for a new manager, they're going to have candidates lined up. Now, since then, they've appointed Michael Beale, that was a disaster, and we've now had 100+ day wait for the next head coach. So the obvious question is, well, kind of what's happened with that database? Why haven't were those managers unavailable? If so, why are they there? And I do agree. I said a few weeks ago, didn't I? I think Christian Speakman or Kirill would be on a hard into nothing coming out and speaking now. But the longer it goes on, I do think clearly it'd be something in-house. Clearly at this stage of a managerial process, you're not gonna put your owner or your sporting director up to speak to the media. As much as I'd love that, Christ, we'd be there in a shot, wouldn't we? But that's not going to happen. But they're not speaking to us, either they're speaking to the fans, and I do think now, if a head coach appointment isn't imminent, and by imminent I mean the next week, 10 days, then I do think we're getting to the stage where a bit of clarification or explaining might be needed.
Yeah, something I just completely agree with. I mean, it will just sort of wrap things up just with the Pascal Jansen stuff. I think the head coach thing has sort of taken, everyone's sort of gaze, and rightly so, because that's the situation we're at. There's so many questions that follow, again, like recruitment this summer. How will the new head coach want to play? But I think of those that, the names that are out there at the moment, again, look, we're not AZ Alkmaar journalists. We don't cover them. We haven't covered them. But I think on the face of things, you look at that track record of bringing players through, and I think Alkmaar have one of the best academies in Europe, if not the world. You look at that, they won the UEFA Youth League, I think it was last season. So that is something that would appeal hugely to Sunderland's hierarchy of reaching that sort of status. You look at how well the under-21s have done this year. if Jansen's at the helm of that, with the experience of doing so, of development players, again, with, the eye to sell them on, reinvest, that's by no means selling your best players. He is certainly the name that at least seems, the most aligned, to coin a term that we've used loads, over the past 100 and odd days. That would be, I think that for me, it would be the difference, with Challinor, etc. Robinson. That's, again, no slight on how well they've done. They've clearly done well at their respective clubs. But the Jansen one certainly seems a lot more club aligned with the vision. And I would get it. I would understand it. Like the Michael Beale one, I understood that in terms of his background and youth development. But this one would certainly make a lot more sense to me, just from the candidates that are out there. I know Liam Rossignol's obviously still, he's still available. Again, there's question marks over him just in terms of, the money that he's had at Hull. He's clearly such a well-regarded coach. I think he speaks really well from the times that I've come across him and spoken with him. But for me, at the moment, as you've said, there will be candidates out there who are unnamed. But for me, at the minute, of the candidates that we're aware of, the Jansen one seems to make the most sense.
Yeah, the Jansen one ticks boxes, didn't it? As soon as I'm not going to lie and pretend I knew an awful lot about him when the name crept out. But when you start doing your reading into it, you soon kind of realise, I can see why. I can see why this fella ticks the boxes and why he would be, why he would be in the mix. Rossini's an interesting one, isn't he? He was heavily linked with Birmingham at the end of this, at the start of this week. But the indication from that end, they appointed Chris Davies last night, Tottenham's assistant, who's been linked with several jobs himself over the last year or so, hasn't he? He was heavily linked with Swansea a couple of times, I think, before and after Mike Duff. But the suggestion at Birmingham was that Rossini was holding out for a championship job. Now, that comes as no surprise, really, does it? Yeah. He was a championship manager of the year nominee this season. His whole team finished just outside the playoffs. He did a good job. And I think Rossini would be an easy sell to fans. I think he's another one who's worked with young players. He's a modern head coach. He'd truly get, I think, the enormity of Sunderland. I think he'd relish that. I think he'd relish that side of it, the stature of it. And like you say, we only speak to these guys 2-3 times a year, but he's always come across really impressive when I've spoken to him before and after games. So, like, has he been spoken to? We're not sure, but surely there's been surely he's been sounded out. Surely there's been contact there. Like, a manager who was nominated as Championship Manager of the Year last season, the most recent season, whose whole team finished just outside the playoffs, is available, and you're looking for a manager. Surely you'd at least sound him out and kind of get a gauge for whether you're on the same track with things.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll see.
The whole one's interesting as well. Just to sort of wrap things up, we'll finish on Rossignol. I mean, the two games that we saw last year, the Sunderland win at Hull, that whole game at home was one of the worst games of Sunderland's season. I've tried to banish it from your memory, so I can't remember what day it was. But
I remember it was on I wasn't there, but I watched it. It was grim, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think from a Hull standpoint, they had a lot of players out missing. The reverse fixture was a bit more lively. Now, I think the Hull owner came out and spoke about style of play, which is, that's the one sort of question mark you'd have. But then you look back to the 4-4 the year prior, and both Sunderland and Hull were going for it. They were full octane sides pushing for it. So I think there's a lot. Again, there's as many question marks about Jansen as there is for Rossignol. At least Rossini's, he's got experience at this level. I mean, it's anyone's guess at the moment, isn't it? Just after, obviously, the Will Still stuff last week, I think it's fair to say, look, he was, that top target. It has been for quite some time. But where we're at the minute, it's, anyone's guess, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. Like, so like next Friday, if someone said to me, now we're going to be sat down doing another video next Friday, will a new head coach be in place then? Like, well, it's kind of the same position that you're in last Friday. Well, there's absolutely no indication that will be the case, but let's hope. I know that the kind of wording has been that they're hoping that they're coming to a conclusion now. But what that means in terms of a timescale, I'm not sure. Just the only other kind of news line, really, I think it's worth talking about to come out this week is the West Ham Divin Mubama.
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously, he's reportedly a target for Sunderland, and he certainly ticked the boxes. He as soon as you see some links you see, don't you, and think, nah, I'm not having that. A little bit like the Challinor and Robinson stuff yesterday, to be fair. But you looked at that one and thought, yeah, that ticks all the boxes. And the suggestions was that he was going to be leaving West Ham on a free, that he turned down a contract offer. But West Ham released their retained list this week, and they're still in talks with him. So it's watch this space on that one, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I know that there was reservations from his side of things in terms of game time. Sunderland would certainly be able to offer that. Was so the striker situation. I feel like that's something that we've gone from speaking about loads to not talking about at all. I mean, Sunderland's squad makeup of where they want to go next year, and again, so much hinges on who they're going to bring in. But the Obama one certainly one to watch. I thought in part that he might have played for the under-21s against Sunderland's under-21s. He didn't. He has played at that level frequently throughout the course of the season. But I think for next season, I mean, you can see, like you said there, why that transfer link makes complete sense. So Adji Elise, Pierre Ekwa, both came from West Ham's academy. It's definitely an area that Sunderland are probably one of the strongest in terms of picking up players on deals like that. Again, a lot of it will depend. That's West Ham are still in talks. That's not ending any sort of interest or reported interest. He's reportedly been a target for well over a year now, so it's not something that's came out of the blue. He's been repeatedly linked with them. He's made his Europa Conference League debut. We've got a scouting piece over on We Are Sunderland all about him. So if you haven't checked that out, you can check that out there. I think we'll wrap things up there, Dom.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Let's see what next week.
Yeah. And if it'll come when you're on holiday, mate, such as the way. But yeah, We Are Sunderland being in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians. If you're watching over on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our videos. Place to be for everything red and white, tactical analysis, exclusive interviews and insight from former players. And it's still just £1 for 6 months worth of coverage. And if you do subscribe at the minute, you'll win or be in with a chance, of winning a signed Sunderland shirt. We're not just giving them away to everyone who subscribes. I know how enticing that is anyway. But yeah, catch you again next week.